On today's episode of Faith and Focus, I want to discuss this concept of what is now called quiet quitting. This concept in the workplace that I think probably all of us are familiar with. Maybe we've never heard of the term. I hadn't heard of it until recently. But it's this term that's kind of given a definition to what a lot of people feel in the workplace. And I want to discuss it and take a look at it from a Christian perspective, kind of what it means in light of the Christian life. So that's what we are going to dive into on this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Hey guys, if you've been a listener of Faith and Focus for a while and have enjoyed what you've been hearing, I would love it if you would consider becoming a monthly supporter of the ministry. As a missionary within Faith, my work is entirely supported by listeners like you, who believe in the work God has called me to do, and podcasting is just a small part of that. I also teach the Bible at my local church, in the ministry house I live in, and with the young men God has put in my life to disciple. I also do biblical counseling that is entirely donation-based, so your monthly support goes in part to help support counseling sessions for people who may not be able to afford any or all of the cost of counseling. And with your monthly support, I would be able to go on to full-time ministry, which would include more podcast recording, new podcast ideas that we've had, and different forms of online teaching, as well as more availability for counseling sessions. If you'd like to become a monthly supporter, you can email me at dennissotheby@infaith.org or head over to infaith.com/Dennis-Sotheby. Thank you. Well, of course, in today's day and age, everything that is anything has to have some kind of fancy name, a diagnosis attached to it. And I don't want to just say laziness, or mediocrity, but these concepts in the workplace have now been referred to as quiet quitting. And I don't know the origin of this term. I think it started on TikTok. Some person decided to deem their attitude at work as quiet quitting, and so the implication is that you're quitting your job, but you're doing so quietly, I guess. You're just sort of, it's like almost like a passive aggressive form of giving up in work. And so I want to read from a New York Times article about it, what this quiet quitting is all about. But I want to look at it and kind of analyze it from a Christian perspective, from the standpoint of like, how should we as Christians, at least as I see things, think about this from a biblical perspective. And not just for workers, kind of analyze it from the employer side of things as well, because obviously employees are not the only entity or party involved in a workplace environment. Business owners are obviously involved in that too. And, I mean, what should be said from the outset is that I don't think there's any denying that a Christian, a mature Christian, somebody who's interested in following the Lord, ought to have an excellent work ethic. They ought to be stellar workers. It's kind of has been an indictment against some Christians that, you know, they can't hold a job, or they're getting fired from jobs from work performance, or, you know, they're just not great workers. And Christians should have the opposite impact in their community. You know, people should be excited to have Christians working for them, because Christians ought to have this attitude of, you know, if I'm going to be here at work, I'm going to work, and you're going to get out of me everything that I have to give. So that's essentially what you're paying for. That's what you're paying me for. So, and as an example, when I was in Bible school, I remember kind of the in job for Bible school students down in Jackson, Michigan, was Olive Garden. Everyone was working at Olive Garden. And But there was a good reputation. Olive Garden loved the students from the school there. And even though obviously there was a turnover rate because students would only be there for at most 2 years, they still loved. You could always get a job if you were a student at New Tribes Bible Institute at Olive Garden, because there was such a great reputation of students working for Olive Garden. So that's the way it ought to be. Now, I'm not advocating that you put "I am a born again Christian" or something on your resume, and like that's going to do you any favors. But it's a sad state of affairs that that isn't something that could be, if you were to put on your resume, I'm actively involved in my church or whatever, as something that, you should hire, that businesses ought to look at that and say, wow, this person is one of these Christian people. I bet you they're probably going to be a really good worker. So it's sad that isn't necessarily the case, but it should be. But this idea of quiet quitting, I want to start reading again. This is from the New York Times. The title is "Who is Quiet Quitting For? For those not ready to make a grand exit, a softer approach may work." This is from August 23rd, 2022 by Allison Kruger. So it says, I recently learned about this term called quiet quitting, where you're not outright quitting your job, but you're quitting the idea of going above and beyond, said Zayad Khan, a TikTok user with 10,000 followers. He says you are still performing your duties, but you're no longer subscribing to the hustle culture mentality. Hustle culture mentally that work has to be our life. Okay. So right from the get-go, that seems to be the general consensus, is that quiet quitting is basically, it's not that you're being lazy or that you're not giving, you're putting in a good day's work. It sounds to me like it's a revolt against, well, he says, like the hustle culture at work. The idea that, anytime that there's overtime to be picked up, you're expected, if you're a good worker, you're showing up, you're picking up overtime, you're coming in on days off. They call you to come in early or stay late. You're coming in and you're doing all that stuff. And that is a virtue that is highly praised in our culture because we are a very, capitalistic culture. We're very business minded. Your career and what you do is your life. It's your identity. You meet somebody. Hi, my name is Dennis. What do you do? And that means, what is your career? It's one of the first questions you always ask people. And that's how you identify yourself, by what you do in your career. So the belief is that you need to give it your all. You need to give your entire life to this job, this career. And so that draws people in, and it creates this mentality that yes, you have to go above and beyond. Like just punching the clock at 9, clocking out at 5 o'clock, Monday through Friday. That's what I'm doing. That's all. That's all I want to do. That's not good enough. You have to be somebody who's willing to go above and beyond. When the boss wants you to work on Saturday, he wants you to stay late, come in early, whatever, all those kinds of things. There's just this expectation that you will say yes. If you're a good worker, you'll say yes to that. You'll put the rest of your life on hold. It's kind of almost like you're on call. If that work calls you, you're expected to be a good team player and show up. So it sounds like quiet quitting, at least in part, is a revolt against that mentality. So for as far as that goes, I would tend to agree with that. I think that we as Christians ought to have more of that mentality. Again, because Christianity has taught this, this kind of Protestant work ethic has been ingrained into our culture so deeply that it is just this hard work culture is Christian. If you are a good Christian, you are somebody who will just beat themselves to death for this job. And of course, a couple passages in the Bible do talk about work. Well, there's several, but in Proverbs 18:9, it says, a lazy person is as bad as someone who destroys things. And I love, actually, the Message says, slack habits and sloppy work are as bad as vandalism. And I love that because it's just like the mentality being, we had the riots of 2020, just burning cities down and stuff like that. And you see it, you go to places and people, break windows out of abandoned buildings and break into abandoned homes and destroy them or spray paint them. Vandalism. You're just destroying your community. And that's bad. But what the proverb is telling you is that if you have slack habits and you're just lazy, a lazy person, you're as bad as that person, or you're a brother to that person, I think is one translation. You're kin to that. You're destroying your community, or you're destroying your home, or you're destroying whatever, your life. You're not actively doing it, you're passively doing it. You're just letting things fall apart around you. So you're letting things be destroyed. So you want to be a hard worker. Proverbs 24:30-34 says, I walked by the field of a lazy person, the vineyard of one who had no common sense. I saw that it was overgrown with nettles, and it was covered with weeds, and its walls were broken down. Then as I looked and I thought about it, I learned this lesson. A little extra sleep, a little more slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, then poverty will pounce on you like a bandit, and scarcity will attack you like an armed robber. So it's, this wise person walks by and you just see someone's home. The grass is overrun. No one's mowed it in a long time. The house is just falling apart. It's in disrepair. There's roofs leaking. You're not patching it up. All this kind of stuff. You just look at that and he says that's indicative of a person whose mentality is just, I'm just going to take a nap. I'm going to sleep in, stay up late. I'll sleep in, show up to work late. All that mentality. You're just barely getting by in life. And it's like, that's not good. Eventually, that poverty is going to catch up to you and destroy you. And of course, there's all these New Testament verses, about slaves and masters. Work hard for your masters, and that's a Christian virtue. So there's some truth to this. Now, I think the idea that you ought to work hard. You should be a hard worker, and you should give it your all. Now, the problem with that is, just like anything, you have to draw boundaries in your life. You have to have these boundaries in your life. Now, the reason I say that is because if you don't have, if your mentality of just you need to work hard is that anytime your boss calls you to come into work or expects something of you, you're obligated to say yes. Otherwise, you're not a hard worker. And I don't think that's the case. Now, it might be indicative of, listen, I don't want anything to do with you. I have no concern about you or your business or my work, but whatever. That could be indicative of something. But just the idea that it's like, hey, I'm not gonna break my back for this job is to have the inability to have that boundary is indicative of the fact that that's something that you're devoted to. I will devote and give my life for this thing. And Scripture, we're called upon to be devoted to certain things. I don't think anyone would deny that. Now, it's a little ambiguous. How do you define devotion? Well, certainly I would say that if you see your spouse for an hour a week, you're probably lacking in devotion to your spouse. It's probably hard to be devoted to something if you're devoting like 1/660th of your time, 1 hour out of 160 hours a week to your spouse. Probably not devoted to that thing. So, we speak of in Romans, we are to be devoted to the church. Romans 12:10 says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. What does that look like? Well, what does devotion look like? This is something that we should be passionate about, that we should be zealous for and giving ourselves to. People are devoted to working out, and they can kind of define that. I wake up every morning at 4:30 and I hit the gym, and I'm there for an hour doing whatever, 5 days a week. I'm devoted to my health. People are devoted to things. We're called on to be devoted to the church. We're called on to be devoted to our family. If you've got a spouse and children, 1 Timothy 5:8 says, if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. We hear that as Americans who are very career-driven, and we think, well, providing for means putting food on the table, bringing in a paycheck. But, how many families that's the definition of the father or the parents, is we provide for our family by working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. We're hardly ever home. We're never there when our kids need us. We're emotionally detached. We're not spiritually engaged in their lives, but we are providing food for them. Would we really say that's providing for your children? That's all that children and a family needs is money? I don't think that's providing for them. I think when it says anyone who does not provide for his family has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever, you're providing for all of their needs. You can't just devote yourself to one aspect of something, like my work. I'm going to devote myself to my work 7 days a week, 12, 15-hour days. You're going to end up neglecting your relationships with other people. You're going to end up neglecting your relationship to the church, these things that we actually are called on to be devoted to. We are not called on to be devoted to a specific career or a specific job. We are told to work hard at those things, but I don't know that you would call that devotion. Again, a devotion means like, I will give my life for this thing. I will lay down my life for what I'm devoted to. I will sacrifice for this thing to the point of, hurt and pain and personal discomfort. I don't see in Scripture where we're ever called to devote ourselves to a job that way. So in that regard, I kind of agree with the quiet quitting. This expectation that you are expected to come in early, stay late, come in on days off, whatever, attend all of these meetings, whatever, all this stuff. Like, your family, if my kid's got a football game I got to go to or whatever. I'm sorry, I can't make it to work. Well, that's unacceptable. You need to be devoted to this job. That mentality, I think, is what the quiet quitting is kind of rebelling against. And so it's sort of like, it gets pictured as like kind of Office Space, if you've seen that movie, where he's just like, why should I go above and beyond for this job that's just going to outsource my job? They don't care about me. And if I go above and beyond, I don't get rewarded for it. So there's no incentive for me to just do the bare minimum. So that's kind of a comical picture of what's called quiet quitting. But there is, I think, this. Now, again, I've already said this, but I do think that Christians ought to, if you're a hard worker, you're sometimes, it's your day off. Man, we're really short-handed. Nobody's answering their phone to come in. Is there any way you can make it in? Saying yes, if you can, if you're able to make it in, you want to make some extra bucks, okay. You can say yes, but it's not wrong to have those boundaries. To say, because in the moral argument for this, you could say, well, Christians, you need to work hard and dedicate yourself to your job. Well, no, we're never called on that, but there isn't a moral component to working. I mean, when you take a job, now you sit down with your employer when they're interviewing and you're forming a contract of sorts. They say, we are going to hire you. Here's the expectations. And if they say, the expectations, we work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And, every once in a while, you might have to work a Saturday, but, and if they're like, well, that's optional or, whatever, okay. But if that's what's expected of you, if that's what's made clear, and they say, we'll pay you, $15 an hour, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, that's what's agreed to. You're not being dishonest or lazy or whatever if you as a Christian say, I have agreed to work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That's what we have agreed to, me and you as my boss. And you've agreed to pay me. and I'll work hard during that time. You're not going to have you won't have a better worker than I am during that time that I've agreed to. And anything other than that, if you call me and say, hey, can you come in or can you stay late? And I say no, I have other obligations. You're not allowed to tell me that I'm somehow robbing the company or short selling the company. I'm doing what I have agreed to do. I'm keeping my word, and I'm keeping my obligation to that. If I choose to stay late, if you ask me to stay late and I say, yeah, I'm able to, I can stay for another half an hour, I am then going above and beyond. But that is extra. I shouldn't just be called like I'm just a good employee. I'm doing an exceptional job. I'm going above and beyond what I was expected to do. And the I think the frustration that leads to this quiet quitting mentality is there seems to be an imbalance in that expectation. There seems to be an imbalance for the employee to even be considered a good employee. You must be somebody who is obligated to go above and beyond, right? If you're somebody who just says, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to come in an hour early. I've got children at home. I've got to get ready for school or whatever. That's my obligation at that time. I'm not going to come in. I'm in at 9 o'clock. I won't be late. I'm going to work hard till 5, but then at 5, I got to get home for dinner with my family. That's another one of my expectations. Sorry, that's what it is. To say that person is a lazy employee because they're not willing to go above and beyond what they've agreed to do is wrong. They are doing what they've agreed to do. And there's an imbalance, that there's an expectation that a good employee is one who will go above and beyond. But there's never an expectation for the employer to go above and beyond, right? So it's sort of like employers can quiet quit as much as they want, meaning doing the bare minimum of what's expected. So, you could have an employer who says, hey, listen, I'm asking you to come in for an extra half an hour. I'm imposing on your time now. I'm asking you to go above and beyond. And sure, I'll compensate you for that, but whatever. Come on, I'm paying you. Well, you paying me the wage that we agreed to, even saying, well, come on, you're making overtime, I'm compensating you. Well, you're not compensating your employee above and beyond. You're compensating them exactly the bare minimum that you agreed to pay them, even if it's overtime. I mean, overtime is, time and a half typically. You go above 40 hours, you make time and a half. So for an employer to pay you, if you're making $15 an hour and you work overtime, what is that? $22.50 per hour? The employer's not doing you a favor. He's not going above and beyond for you to say, oh, I'm doing you such a favor by paying you this overtime. No, you are doing what is expected of you. I'm working overtime. You're paying me overtime wages. There never seems to be an expectation that the employer should have to go above and beyond to be considered a good employer. And so, what would that look like? You ask your employee to, hey, could you stay over for an extra 15 minutes? I know I'm asking you last minute. It really would help us out. We could knock out this project, whatever it might be. And they say, yeah, okay. So they're going above and beyond. They're cutting out their own time, whatever. Okay. But what would be above and beyond for an employer, and especially a Christian employer? Because, there are mandates in Scripture for Christian employees to be a good worker. But there are mandates for the employer as well to be a good boss, to not withhold wages, to pay your employees fairly, and to treat them like you have a master in heaven. Just as a side note, too, we use the slave master comparison in the New Testament. And, whatever. I know there's some overlap and some application there. But I do think we need to be careful that when we communicate within the Christian community that, like slave and master, if you work for a company, you are not a slave and they're not your master. You've entered into a free will contract, and they're not allowed to abuse you, and you are not allowed to, be a slack employee or whatever too. And you are free to leave whenever you want. You're not enslaved to that person, and they're not allowed to treat you that way. So, but the boss is expected to act like they've got a God who is going to have an opinion about how they act as an employer too. So a Christian employer ought to be, just as a Christian should be the most sought after and coveted employees because of how well they'll work, Christian employers ought to be the most sought after employers. That, you know what, we're not going to demand that you come in and work extra hours and then judge you or ridicule you if you don't. We know you've got a life outside of this place. And not just compensating them because, well, you worked over and sure, we paid you. But what if, at the end of a week, at the end of a month, you noticed, hey, this employee has been doing a good job. They show up on time. That's better than half the population. Sometimes they don't even show up for work. They always show up on time. They're always got a good attitude. They work great. At the end of that month, if you just say, hey, you know what? Here's a $50 gift card to, whatever, Applebee's. That's called going above and beyond as an employer. Just like you might be expected to give up your time as an employee, hey, go above and beyond. They didn't necessarily earn that in the sense of they didn't go above and beyond. And, if they're going above and beyond and you're giving them a gift card or a bonus, again, that's not necessarily you going above and beyond. That's you recognizing and treating them fairly and compensating them. But, to go above and beyond and just maybe even say, hey, you know what? You worked really hard. It's Friday. Hey, cut out early. Take off at 4 o'clock. You don't have to clock out. Just, whatever. Stay on the clock till 5, but take off. Bosses should be expected to do that. If we're going to expect employees to give it, 110% all the time, well, bosses need to give it 110%, especially Christian employers need to act this way. But I think it's wrong, So, that's what this quiet quitting mentality is. It's people kind of rebelling against that. I'm expected to work 50, 60, 70 hours. Otherwise, I'm not going above and beyond. So then I'm just doing the bare minimum of what's expected of me, and I'm not a good employee. And so I think that's justified. And we as Christians have to recognize that our culture will demand that hustle of the people. And again, hustle mentality does not mean working hard. It means dedicating and enslaving yourself to this job. Whenever they ask, whenever they call upon you, you show up, you work hard, all this kind of stuff. Day or night, if they call you in the middle of the night saying, hey, a crisis has broke out of the office, we need you in right now, you are expected to get up and go in. If they call you on a Saturday, hey man, we need you to come in. They're not, you can say no and not be punished by that. We have to recognize that the world system is enslaving people to give themselves to their jobs. And we as Christians have to draw that fine boundary that says, I have other things that I'm called upon to be devoted to. I'm called on to be devoted to God and to the body of Christ. I'm called upon to be devoted to my family. I have other things that I'm devoted to before I'm devoted to this job. And then there's nothing wrong with saying that. I know that, that's why I think Christians have to go, to work hard and go the extra mile when they are at work. When you are supposed to be at work, you are there basically gaining the capital, the relational capital, wherewith you can say, I'm not going to come in on Saturday. I'm sorry, that's family time, whatever. I've got a ministry event, something with the church I'm doing. And that boss is not going to say, well, I'm going to fire you then, because they're like, I can't fire them. I really need them Monday through Friday. They're such a good worker. You've earned that capital, that employment capital, that leverage basically to keep your job. So Christians have to have that, but they have to be able to say, because you can only be devoted to so many things. If you devote yourself to your job and to your advancement in your career, you can't, then you're going to sacrifice that time that you're giving to that job that you're not going to be able to give to something else. You're going to cut it from ministry. You're going to cut it from your family. You're going to cut it from just relaxation and leisure. There's nothing wrong with, as an employee, I've had people call me, people I work for, and have worked for that say, hey, we've really got some work to do on the weekend. Are you able to come in on Saturday? And I'll tell them, no, I'm really not. I got something going on. And you're not obligated to tell them what you have going on. Sometimes when I say I've got something going on, what I mean is I'm sitting on the couch reading a book. That's what I'm doing. And I'm not obligated to tell you that that's what I'm doing so that you can deem whether that's a valid enough opinion or a valid enough excuse in your opinion for not coming into work. To me, that's what's most important. I want to relax. I want to just have a day off and decompress. And I don't need the money and I don't need the stress. So no, I'm not coming in. I've got something going on. But you're not obligated. So I think this whole quiet quitting is a rebellion against that mentality that you must lay your life down for this job. And I think that we as Christians ought to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I will give you everything I got, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. But I'm putting boundaries in place. And other things are more important to me. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Now, when quiet quitting swings the other direction and becomes, even on the times that I've obligated myself to work here, that 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, or whenever that might be. Obviously, I'm just using that as an example. But whenever that is, I have agreed and I have given you my verbal consent. I've signed contracts. I've signed agreements. I will work for you during this time. You are obligated as the Christian. You show up during that time. You work hard during that time. You give it your all during that time because you've agreed to do that. Anything else is just if you want to. That's not an obligation. So it's an interesting concept. I think it has some potential, especially in Christianity. I think that if we teach on this concept of quiet quitting accurately, I think it can be biblical. Again, I don't like the term quiet quitting because to me that sounds like I'm just going to slack off until they fire you or something. I don't know what the end goal is, but to I think reclaim this sense of ownership, self-ownership of, hey, my time and my life is my time and my life. I don't owe my life to you as an employee. I think that can be a good thing, and certainly we as Christians should be promoting that truth. Regardless of what you call it quiet quitting, call it not being devoted to the world system in your career. I don't know. I don't really care what you call it, but I think that we should lean into that as Christians and see where we can find the biblical balance for this concept and this type of mentality. So that's what I have for you today. Hope you enjoy it, and hopefully you are quiet quitting in a good sense, but devoting yourself to the Lord, to the church, to ministry, to discipleship, and the Great Commission. So again, that's the episode for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one. While Faith in Focus is a ministry of In Faith, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of In Faith as a mission.